Yokoso owashitare. Welcome back yet again to another story. Now, before we begin, I am going to say that I've been a little bit lazy the past few days. Because of that, I haven't actually written out in English what this story is, so I'm translating it as I'm reading it right now, which means it might not be as good. Who knows? Maybe having no script at all might actually end up making it more interesting with the extra freedom. I don't know. We will see. But also with this story, it does involve a lot of cultural assumptions that I'm not totally familiar with when it comes to sumo wrestling in ancient Japan. Also, it involves a lot of specific movements that I'm not entirely sure how they work. And so there's a lot in this story that I'm kind of up in the air about, but hopefully it'll still be a good story. But with no further delays, let's just get into it. Once upon a time, ima wa mukashi, in the reign of Emperor Enyu, in the age of Eikam, which you don't have to worry about most of that, but it's just how they measured time. On the 7th month, in the Horikawa residence, the Horikawa building, which is just a building in the capital, they held their usual big sumo wrestler tournament competition festival thing. And over the course of deciding who was going to actually compete in this tournament, they settled on two very important names. Now, one thing to know is, like so much of Japanese society at this time, things were separated into two halves. There was the left side and the right side. And this was the same for the palace guards, technically, is what the sumo wrestlers were a part of. So there was the left palace guards and the right palace guards. And these were primarily the ones who hosted sumo wrestlers and hosted these tournaments. So, again, while deciding who was going to actually show up in the tournament, the left produced their number one guy, who was from a previous story, Makami no Narimura. He's the guy who got chased around by the scholar and barely escaped with not getting his butt kicked, if you remember that story. And then the right side chose their top performer, Kai no Tsuneyo, who was the guy who fought with the big giant snake. And then, of course, we have to have a little background about them. Narimura was a sumo wrestler from the province of Hitachi. He began his sumo wrestling career during the reign of Emperor Murakami. And of course, he was very big, very strong, and almost nobody could match him in strength. Tsuneyo, on the other hand, was from the province of Tango. And likewise, he actually began his sumo wrestling career during the reign of Emperor Murakami. And although Tsuneyo was actually a little bit smaller, not quite as physically strong as Narimura, he was, however, extremely skilled in his art. So a little bit smaller, but got more skill to make up for it. Now, of course, as both of these men were the number one performer on the left and the number one performer on the right, they had known each other, and they actually had a bit of a friendly rivalry that had been going on for a while at this point. Now, if I remember in some of the things that I've read, normally the left and the right didn't actually compete against each other. They usually competed within their own spheres, but for some reason everybody thought it would be a good idea to pit the number one guy on the left and the number one guy on the right against each other. Now, this may have been great from a showman's perspective. You know, you get the best players to go off against each other. It just seems like of course, duh, that makes the most sense. However, this wasn't a great situation for either of them, because by virtue of them fighting each other, that meant one of them was going to have to lose. And my guess is that since both of them were the top of the ranks, and given how the ranking system worked, how if you lost to a guy, you lost your rank, or if you beat a guy, you gained your rank, but since both of them were at the top, they couldn't rise up. There was no further above for them to go. So the guy who won is just going to end up staying where he is, and the guy who's lost is just going to end up taking on a bunch of humiliation and shame for losing. And this would have been especially true in the case of Narimura's instance, because Narimura had been a sumo wrestler for a lot longer. He was like the senior. He was the senpai, as a modern translation that I double-checked suggests that he was. He was the senpai, right? And so for the junior to potentially beat the senior, that's even more shameful because that shouldn't happen. But that was a distinct possibility with these two like gargantuan titans of strength going up against each other. This is what was decided. So the two men were set up. They had a match, and the match began. However, during the course of the match, Narimura requested not a timeout, but like a cancellation of the match 6 times. 6 whole times. He stopped the fight, and he went over to the judge, which was the emperor. But the emperor was not only watching the tournament, but he was kind of presiding over it and made final decisions on what happened. So Narimura went and pleaded with the emperor, please, can we just cancel this? 6 times. 6 whole times. He did this over the course of their fight. Now, as far as I can tell from the story, what would happen is they would the two sumos would clash, Narimura and Tsuneyo. They would clash, they would break apart, and then Narimura would go over to the sides to request a cessation. But it's not like there was a timeout. It's not like he called a timeout so he could go over and ask them. He just did it of his own accord. So, under the rules, it would have been totally legal and normal for Tsuneyo to just come, grab him, attack him while his back was turned, and take the victory. However, Tsuneyo was very hesitant to do this for a few reasons. Number one, both of the men were kind of not happy with the situation. And Tsuneyo was, he was a decent guy. He didn't want to take this opportunity to just ruin and screw over his really good rival friend, That's just kind of a douchebag thing to do. Also, Narimura was a really, really strong sumo wrestler. So even if he had tried to make a surprise attack, there's a very good chance that he would lose that ultimately. And then now he would have to bear the shame of losing whilst also engaging in kind of some underhanded, dirty tactics. So every time they clashed and then broke apart and Narimura went to go plead that they stop the fight, Tsuneyo just kind of backed off and was just like, you know what? Have at it, bro. I'm not going to stop you. Do what you need to. So up until this point, Narimura has requested a stop 6 times. And he tries one last time. And on the 7th and final time, he goes over, he says, please, can we just stop? And the Emperor says, no, continue. And at this point, Narimura is so frustrated that he's actually weeping. His big, hulking, strong, hypermasculine dude is weeping because apparently this is a really big deal. And as you'll see, I think Narimura was just kind of an emotional guy. He was a little hot-headed, whereas Tsuneyo was a little bit cooler-headed, a little bit more level-headed. And so being denied a 7th time, Narimura, while weeping and frustrated, decides that he's going to take his anger out on his opponent. So, being frustrated, he and Tsuneyo clash, and Narimura comes at Tsuneyo hard. So they're up together, they're grappling, and Tsuneyo wraps his arm around Narimura's neck and grabs his side, which I think was pretty standard procedure at this point. Tsuneyo's not doing anything crazy. But Narimura, in his frustration and anger, this is where I'm kind of confused on some of the details, but Narimura grabs Tsuneyo's, the diaper thing that the sumo wrestlers kind of wear. It's not really a diaper, but it's just that thing that they kind of have around their loins. But he grabs it in such a way, and he pulls Tsuneyo right up to him just as hard as he can. He just... And so both of these hulking, gargantuan men are just chest to chest, and Narimura is just pulling with all his might, and of course Tsuneyo is probably pulling back, trying to not get overpowered. But apparently this was a little bit strange, these tactics that Narimura was doing, because with them right next to each other, Tsuneyo kind of just looks at him and says under his breath, quietly so nobody else can hear, "Dude, are you crazy? What are you doing?" But despite Tsuneyo's best efforts to get Narimura to calm down and realize that he was going on a bit of a rampage, it didn't faze Narimura at all. Nothing that Tsuneyo said to Narimura got through. Narimura just kept pulling and straining and just fighting. And again, I'm not entirely sure what he was doing, but it wasn't standard. It was the frustrated, desperate, struggling of a man who is cornered and is having a really rough time. So they're sitting there, they're right up next to each other, they're pulling, they're struggling, they're pushing. Maybe Tsuneyo's trying to break through, trying to shove Narimura off him, not entirely sure. But Narimura goes for what's called a sotogake, which again, I'm not entirely sure what it entails. And to anybody who's a big fan of sumo wrestling, who knows these terms for modern sumo wrestling, just because it's the same in the past does not mean it's the same as today. So a sotogake back then may not have been the same as it is today, just warning you. But Narimura goes for a sotogake, which as far as I can tell is where you step on the outside of your opponent's leg and you try to trip them, essentially try to judo, jujitsu, throw them to the ground. However, Tsuneyo, being the really skilled practitioner that he was kind of waiting for this, because I'm guessing it was a pretty obvious step that Narimura was going to do. He was seeing red. Narimura was obviously frustrated, not thinking very deeply about anything. It's like in boxing, somebody throwing a haymaker because they're angry. But this is the sumo wrestler version of that. So Tsuneyo, seeing that this is coming, instead of getting caught by the sotogake, he pulls some kind of a move on the inside and trips Narimura from the inside of his legs. So Narimura and Tsuneyo both go down. Narimura lands flat on his back, just facing up. And Tsuneyo lands on top of him, but kind of on his side. Now again, I want to stress the unusualness of this whole situation, because At this, they both fell to the ground, and I'm not entirely sure one determines in ancient Japanese sumo who wins or who loses. I'm assuming it's whoever hits the ground first, but whereas both of these men hit the ground, Narimura hits first, but both of these men hit the ground, and with Narimura being so frustrated and crying and angry and just going mad, when both of these men hit the ground, normally what would happen when the match was over is the winner would give the loser a nice slap on the back and laugh, good-natured, manly, ha ha ha, good one, bro, like when football players, they slap each other on the butt for some reason, it's just good old boy, masculine horsing around. And then, of course, the crowd erupts and cheers normally, and they're loud and great, and this is awesome, ooh, we're having a big party. But none of that happened here. Instead, both men hit the ground, and they both just kind of laid there for a second. And everybody watching, instead of erupting into loud applause, everybody just kind of goes dead silent. And then there's a little bit of whispering and hushed, excited whispering here and there. People going, what happened? What is going on? This is insane. Why is it like this? People, just what they normally do when they see something strange / scary / unusual. Now, the result of this match took a long time. It took all day for the judges to decide who ended up winning because it was so unusual. Again, this is where the struggle is, where I'm not entirely sure what happened because I'm not familiar with Heian period sumo wrestling rules and customs. But after they both fell down with this weird draw-like situation where people didn't exactly know what was happening and things were heightened and not good, after laying there for a bit, Narimura gets up and he just leaves. Without saying a word to anybody, he just immediately goes to the locker room as it was. He gets ready, and then he just leaves for home. He does not stick around to see even the result. He does not stick around for the festivities. He just wants to leave. He lost, he's shamed, and this was a complete waste of time, and this was terrible, so he just wanted to get out of there and away from the capital as fast as he could. Tsuneyo, on the other hand, wasn't moving. He was just laying there. And upon further inspection, he was just out cold. He wasn't dead, but he was out cold. So a bunch of servant folk, they come, they pick up Tsuneyo, and they took him to the Yuba Dono, which was just a place where they could put him away and let him rest without people hounding him about the match. So they got Tsuneyo somewhere where he could relax. They had him sit down to catch his breath and recover, because I guess he wasn't completely unconscious at this point. He was still kind of there, but he was out of it. But the head of their side of the palace guards, the lead general, I guess you could say, Fujiwara no Sumitoki, who was the Dainagon, was his official position. He was thoroughly impressed by Tsuneyo's abilities, and he took the robe off of his own back. And again, remember, robes were kind of like their version of money back in the day, and a robe from a Fujiwara was going to be exceptionally expensive, and it was the robe off of his own back. This was a huge honor for Tsuneyo. So a bunch of the guys who were not witness to the actual match began asking the servants who were there to see it, how did Narimura do? And the guys who had seen it just said in a kind of non-committal, unconfident, confused way with that 1,000-yard stare, well, he won. He won. Because although technically Tsuneyo did actually win, it wasn't a good instance. Nobody was happy about this, apparently. Now, in response to this, a lot of the other senior nobles and other noblemen thought that Tsuneyo had done a really good job, and they themselves followed the example of Fujiwara no Sumitoki, and they all took off their robes and they laid it across Tsuneyo. But Tsuneyo, we don't exactly know how he reacted. We just know that he was kind of off in a daze, like he wasn't quite there. And unfortunately, because it's a really old source, it seems like there's a section missing here. But it's very likely that even though Tsuneyo was able to accept these very nice clothes, he wasn't actually able to wear them because he was just out of it. Something was not right. He was not normal at this point. But the festival ends, the competition ends, everybody goes home. And on his way back home, Tsuneyo stops in the province of Harima, and he dies there. And all the other sumo wrestlers around who heard the story, they all decided that it was probably because when Narimura and Tsuneyo had their chests pushing against each other, Tsuneyo's bones were probably all broken, and that it took a while for him to succumb to his wounds, and he died, and that's why he was also out of it for the entire after party. And Narimura, for 10 years, he refused any sumoing after that. He never went up to the capital again. And every time somebody asked him, so why don't you go compete in sumo anymore? He just said, because I'm ashamed. Because I am ashamed of what happened. And not long after that, after 10 years of living out in the provinces, never going to the capital, Narimura was eventually killed by an enemy. We don't know exactly why he had enemies, but when you lived out in the province and you were a strong man and you were rich and fairly well known, it's likely you had enemies, and because policing wasn't as rigorous as it is now, people could get away with all sorts of stuff. It was kind of like the Wild West, except it was in the East. So it was the Wild East. And apparently, when this story was written down, Narimura's son, Tamenari, was the number one guy of probably the left side of the palace guards. And apparently he was alive when they wrote this down. So Narimura's son, Tamenari, was around. Cool. If you want to look up when specifically this is, I don't know exactly when it is, but the story mentions it, so it's there. Cool. What I said before about the best sumo on the left and the best sumo on the right never fighting each other apparently wasn't actually a thing. It became a thing after this incident, because not long after this whole shindig went down, the emperor decided, you know what, we are not going to have the best on the left and the best on the right compete against each other anymore. Now, the author whoever wrote this, decided that he wanted to go out of his way to explain that it wasn't because of this specific match that was why they stopped having the left and the right compete against each other, the best of the left and the best of the right compete against each other. But he points to some other instances where an empress died, and because of that, people decided that they weren't going to hold this big match anymore. And again, the author assumes that we understand some of the intricacies of ancient Japanese culture that I don't actually fully understand. But for whatever reason, whatever the real reason was why they stopped having the best compete against each other, rumor spread amongst everybody all over the place that the reason why was because Tsuneyo ended up dying and Narimura ended up quitting. And so because of that, we're just not going to have it. That's what people began to say. And the story ends, of course, with, "Thus is it said that the match between Narimura and Tsuneyo should never have happened." And this story is particularly interesting because it seems like the previous stories were all about sumo wrestlers, and it ends with the final sumo match, the sumo match to end all sumo matches. And the author goes out of his way to explain that this is why things are the way they are. What he doesn't mention is that in order to fully understand why the things are the way they are, we needed to understand some other things and how they were, because we don't live 1,000 years ago in ancient Japan. And of course, like I said, I was a little bit lazy, so I was just translating right off of the actual story, right off of the old words, instead of translating it into an English script first. So things may have been a little weird. If it seems a little off, that's why. Also, the next story, if you're actually following where the stories are, the next story I'm just going to skip because it doesn't actually have anything to do. It's kind of in the same vein where it's two men competing, and because of their competition, a certain custom was thrown out or changed. But it doesn't actually even go into the details of how the competition happened. It just said that there was a competition, one guy lost, one guy won for reasons X and Y, and then that's why we no longer have this anymore. And it was specifically a horse race. But I'm going to skip that and move on into the next scroll completely. This is scroll 23. We're going to move on to scroll 24, where there's some actually really interesting stories. A lot of them are going to be really short, but just a little heads up so you know what's coming up in the future. Anyway, that's going to do it for me. I very much appreciate you listening to me sitting here and rambling about ancient Japanese stuff that happened 1,000 years ago that really doesn't, at first glance, seem to have a lot to do with us. But as with any kind of literature, for those who are particularly perceptive or intelligent, I'm sure you can probably glean all sorts of wise tidbits from these stories, and that's what I'm hoping you do. So thank you very much. Please like, share, subscribe. Share with all your weeb friends particularly, because being ancient Japanese history and literature, this is kind of like super weeby, beyond weeby, ultra weeby. I don't know what that says about me, but anyway, katejike no koso haberikere, and hopefully we will see you in the next one. Ciao. That's not Japanese.